Hello, everybody, and thank you for taking some time out to watch this video, and thank you for considering being a part of the Here's My Story campaign. I think it's a campaign that's going to help a lot of people, and I think it could really be an incredible evangelistic tool. I think thousands could come to know Jesus Christ as a result of hearing testimonies from people. Because it gives people, I really do believe that, and I know that people are searching for something that is bigger than themselves, something with meaning, and they know that there's something with meaning out there, but they're not quite sure how to get there. And so Here's My Story campaign gives them the opportunity to grab on to something. It lets them know that God is real and that they can have a real encounter with Him that can change their lives. And so you being a part of the Here's My Story campaign is really you being a part of an evangelistic effort that could reach thousands with the gospel of Jesus Christ and can reach people here in Granbury as well. And so thank you for thinking about being a part of this campaign. Now, as we talk about stories, again, it gives people that opportunity. Since a testimony is so personal, it gives them the opportunity to hear it from somebody else's point of view. And as we play these stories online, it gives people the opportunity to check it out in a more personal way and to explore the possibility that they have in their mind that there is a God, and that gives them the opportunity to introduce Him to them. The world needs to know that Jesus is real, and the Here's My Story campaign is all about that. And so what I've done here is I've put together some simple things to remember when you're talking about putting together a story. Now, one of the first things to remember, 4 principles to remember, is what I'm going to start with. And by the way, I'm going to keep this video short because I know you don't want to watch a long video either. And so I'm going to talk about 3 things. Number 1, I'm going to talk about some principles to remember. I'm going to talk about the structure of a good story. And then I'm going to talk about developing your story and how to make it that much better. And so first of all, let's take a look at 4 principles to remember. And the first one is this: we want to keep it short. And the reason we want to keep it short is because if somebody is looking at a video online, down at the bottom right, you can look at it and you can find out how long that video is before you're going to watch it. And people will look at that first. And if that video is too long, they're not going to spend time on it because they don't have that much time and they don't know what it is. And so they won't even watch it to find out if it's any good. But if it's short, the chances of them pushing yes and pushing play on it go up tremendously. So we do want to keep it short. If it's too long, you'll talk about things that don't matter and you'll probably lose their attention as well. I know, however, at the same time, one of the reasons why we're going through this is because I sat down to tell one of my stories, and you would be amazed. Man, we don't want our stories to be any more than 3 minutes long. You would be amazed at how quickly 3 minutes goes by. I had to do it 3 times to get the thing under 3 minutes. So keeping it short is really not easy to do. And so we've got to think of some things that we can do to keep it short. Number 1, keep it short. Number 2, how do you do that? Well, start with a structure in mind. You don't have to be rigid with it, but start with a structure in mind. I'm going to begin with this, I'm going to hit it with this, and then I'm going to end with that. Maybe it's a structure of 4 different things, but keep the structure in mind and how much time you want to spend on all of those things. That way you can shorten the things that don't matter and elongate the things that do. Number 3, you want to have a theme. And the theme basically is, what's the point that you're getting at? And really, I would say to you this: the thing that you learned from the story, that's the theme. So whatever you learned from God in the midst of that story, you want to make sure that theme comes out. You want to make sure that they know this is what you're supposed to learn from the story, okay? So have a theme that's there. Number 4, just a quick reminder, you probably already know this, but avoid Christianese terms. Terms like salvation, sanctification, glorification, atonement, atoning sacrifice, justification, and on and on. People have no idea, especially if they've never been in church, they have no idea what those things mean. And so we don't want to use those words that they don't understand. And so that's a little bit about the principles to remember. Let's move now on to the subject of the structure of a good story. What is the structure of a good story? Well, if you just think about play, or if you think about a movie, the first thing you're going to think about is the characters. Now, God is always a character in a testimony, and whether it's God as Father, God as Jesus, God as the Holy Spirit, it doesn't matter which one, whatever one applies to your story, but make sure that God is always a character in your story. But who else? You know, my wife and I, you and a parent. I remember one of the stories that I have. I'm in the middle of a room and I'm surrounded by hundreds of people. Now, all of those people almost become a character in the story. So there's side characters, there's important characters, and all of that. And so if there's characters in the story that help it, make sure you include them. Number two, think about the setting. And when I say setting, you want to say it in a way that people can picture themselves where you are. I have a story where there's a time whenever I'm sitting in my car in a small town, and I've pulled up to a four-way stop, and I've stopped, and I've looked down, and and in the story, what time it is matters, and I look down, and there's a clock there. Now, as I sit there and talk about that, you can almost picture yourself doing that. You can picture yourself at that four-way stop, that kind of a thing. And so whenever you're giving a story, you want to give enough of the setting that people can picture themselves in the place where you are. In another story of mine, I was struggling, and God was talking to me, and I'd finally had enough, and I left the office, and I went down the elevator, went and got in my car, and I drove 2 blocks down to the mall parking lot, which was basically empty, and I went out in this remote parking lot, and I pulled into a parking spot, and I turned off the key, and then I began to speak to God. Now, all of that is setting. Doesn't take me long to do it, but you want a little bit of that setting there so that people can picture themselves where you are. Number 3, so first is characters. Number 2 is setting. Number 3, think about the tension and the conflict in the story. There's a point in the story where everything goes wrong, where everything is messed up, and it's those times that you want to really bring in the tension. For me, some of my stories would go like this. You know, I'll never forget sitting in the doctor's office and hearing the word cancer, right? Just those words create a little bit of tension. Everything had fallen apart in my life, or we had no idea what we were going to do because we had just run out of options. You know, what I'm doing there is I'm building the tension. I'm letting everyone know how it felt to be in the position that I was in. Now, storytellers, that's building tension, and we don't want to fake it, but you do want to remember those parts of the time so that you can describe it in your story. Number 4, obviously, remember the encounter that you had with Jesus Christ, and you really want to point to this in your story. When God moves and God speaks and God says what it is that He says, whenever you have that encounter with God, you're certainly going to want to explain that and talk about that. For me, one of mine is I'm sitting across from my father, and he said to me, "Mark, I can see it in your eyes. You've got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder, and you can't quite decide which one you're going to follow." And then he said, "I hope you make the right decision." And then as I tell that story, I recall, he says, "I hope you make the right decision." I can remember, man, just feeling it in my soul, and that it just hit me. And I could feel that, and I understood, man, I've been going the wrong direction. I was living in a manner that wasn't consistent with who it was God wanted me to be. And I could just feel Him moving in my soul. What I'm doing there is I'm describing the encounter that I had with God, the encounter that I had with Christ, and that's absolutely important in a story about Jesus. Number 5, talk about the transformation that you had. And this is the point in the story where we respond to God. I decided it was time for me to start trusting God. And from then on, I began to ... I said yes to God in my heart. And from then on, I was at peace. Or I couldn't say no to God, so the next day I did this or I did that. It's those times whenever God speaks, and then how did you respond? What was your transformation? What was different as a result of having an encounter with the Lord Jesus Christ? So that's number 5, transformation. Number 6, talk about your new life. Talk about how things are different. I know for me, from all of the encounters that I've had with God, that has developed within me this idea that says, why do I need to wait until I'm in trouble before I start listening to God? And so as a result, what I've begun to do is I've begun to say, instead of waiting till I'm in trouble, I want to listen to God before the problem is there, so that whenever I run into it, I'm already prepared. And so the encounters that I've had with Christ have changed how I live my life today. That's transformation. That's a new life, if you will. And so the transformation is when I decide to follow the new life. That's whenever that's how I'm different now as a result. And then number 7, think about the inherent values. And it might be something like this. Faith isn't something that I generate on my own. What I learned is that I don't generate faith on my own, that faith is my response to God. There's an inherent value. That's a final takeaway. Trusting Jesus with my life changed everything. That's a final takeaway. I've discovered that God's ways are better than my ways. What I'm doing whenever I say those things is I'm letting those know who hear the story that this is your takeaway. And this is what I'm telling you God did in my life. And if you trust in Him, He can do it in your life as well. And so that's the inherent values that you want to follow up on. Okay, and then the last section that I want to talk to you about briefly is developing your story. And again, these are just things to think about. I know you can tell a story, but some of these things just might make it a little bit better. So think through them. Okay, when you're developing your story, first let's talk about getting started. What story might you tell? And I think this is a really good sentence. And here's the sentence. Listen to this. If your life were a movie, what are the scenes or the scene that you'll never forget? If your life were a movie and you were to go back and say, okay, what's the scene that changed everything? What's the scene that everyone would want to go back and see? Okay, what is that time in your life that it just changed the course of your life and you learned so much and everything was different as a result? That's so you want to think about those times in your life, number 1. Number 2, I want you to identify one main sentence that describes your encounter with Jesus. And so identify your encounter and one main sentence. And here are some of mine and my stories. I already said one of them. Mark, you've got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other. You can't quite decide who you're going to follow. That is the encounter. Here's another one. It was the time that God said to me, Mark, would you follow me even if I didn't do what you want me to do? Okay, and I felt that from God. That's the encounter. I remember when I was called into the ministry, I remember saying to my father when we were having a conversation, you know what, Dad, I'll never be in the ministry, right? That is a pivotal moment in one of my stories, and on it goes. And so once you identify that point at which everything begins to the switch begins to flip in your story, okay? Because you're going to want to identify that, because you're going to want to lead to it, then you're going to want to talk about the result of it. Number 3, bring your entire story down to one sentence. And ask yourself, what is the main idea? What is the main thing that I learned? What is the main thing that others should learn as a result of this? What's the main thought? It might be that believing is a choice, that faith is receiving and accepting, that God's ways are better than my ways, that when you trust in God, He really does care, those types of things. And so think about that main point and make sure everything goes to that point. And then number 4, develop the structure of the story. Develop the structure of your story but develop it towards the encounter. I know that whenever people make movies, a lot of the stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. I tell you, in a lot of our stories, especially when we have to get them down to 3 minutes in order for people to listen to them, a lot of stuff has to end up on the cutting room floor. Now, if you develop your structure and you know what your main point is and the main thing that you're trying to get out, that's how you start to leave stuff on the cutting room floor. So develop the structure, know what the main point is and all of that. And then the last thing I want to encourage you to do is to practice your testimony, all right? Practice it and get it down to 3 minutes or less. I think the last one that I did ended up at 2 minutes and 40 seconds or 2:45. I'd like to get mine down to 2 minutes and 30 seconds, but practice your testimony. However, don't memorize it, okay? When you tell your story, just tell it, okay? So you remember the structure and you remember the story and you've practiced the testimony and practiced the story, but don't memorize it. Just tell it when it's time to tell it. Okay, so those are my thoughts on that. Now, whenever you sit down to record your testimony, probably what you'll find out after the first time is that it's a whole lot longer than you think it should be. But you'll already know those things that you need to cut, and you can already go looking at those things, and you can kind of reimagine it in your mind and get it down to 3 minutes. But there you go. I hope some helpful advice on how to put together a story, helpful in helping us be able to tell our story. And I want you to remember, this is worth your time, right? I mean, I don't know. So our hope is to put this on social media and then to expand it out into the world. Our hope is to have at least 50 stories. So don't be afraid. It's not going to be just your story going out. We're looking at sending multiple stories out, okay? And we want to play them for the church as well, just a little bit at a time. And as the weeks go by, here and there, we want to be able to play a testimony just to encourage the people here in the church. God gave you the gift of the story that you have, and it is so, so important that you let others know about what it is God has done in you. Because really, here's the reality. I call it, here's my story, but really, here's His story through me. And man, that changes everything. So I just want to encourage you. Thank you for being a part of this. And I can't wait to see what God is going to do.